news tonight. The Western allies welcome an old enemy to join the family. The president tells the Pope sexual abuse by priests is damaging the church's reputation. Secret recordings made in Italy before the September attacks. The terrorists talk about hitting the U.S. with planes. The annual testing for how safe are cars. Stronger and safer because of consumer pressure. We'll take a closer look. And in the image of Spider-Man, the real version. Urban exploration and the young people who love it.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening, everyone. President Bush is on his way home from his whirlwind tour of Europe. The final day was marked by a couple of fairly remarkable moments. Mr. Bush and the other members of the Western Alliance welcoming Russia as a partner. During the Cold War, who would have thought it? And then the president went to see the Pope after saying very publicly that he would raise the sexual scandals in the Catholic Church here. That caught the Vatican somewhat off guard. Our traveling White House correspondent is Terry Moran.
The president was ushered into the Pope's office in the Vatican. John Paul II, stricken and stooped by advancing Parkinson's disease, shielded his eyes in jest from the intense volley of camera flashes. They met for 20 minutes, discussing the Middle East, Russia, and indirectly the sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church in America. Earlier, and to the consternation of Vatican officials, the president signaled reporters he would raise that issue indirectly with the Pope.
I will tell him that I am concerned about the Catholic Church in America. I'm concerned about its standing.
History was made earlier in the day at an airbase outside of Rome, a site chosen to provide maximum security from potential terrorist attacks, as the leaders of the NATO alliance welcomed their former enemy to their table.
Two former foes are now joined as partners, overcoming 50 years of division and a decade of uncertainty.
The signing ceremony brought Moscow into the military alliance that so resolutely opposed it for 50 years. But for all the martial pomp of this ceremony, Russia will not be a full NATO member, only a sort of junior partner, voting on a strictly limited number of issues, especially counterterrorism, but not including tricky issues such as increasing NATO membership.
Russia cannot have a veto over who becomes a member of NATO or not.
Still, the new Russian relationship with NATO gives Mr. Bush what he came to Europe for, more help with his main priority, the war on terrorism. Terry Moran, ABC News, with the president in Rome.
There was a report today in the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera, which produces some new evidence about the possibility of the terrorist attack on the United States involving airplanes. The information was made available, or at least was available, before September the 11th, and ABC's Brian Ross is here to tell us the details and why it may not have been made more public before September 11th.
Well, Peter, some are calling it the most dramatic smoking gun to date. Transcripts of an al-Qaeda leader in Italy talking of something big involving airplanes in the United States. Italian police tapped the phones at this mosque in Milan because it served as the headquarters for this man, Abdelkader Es-Sayad, an Egyptian and a top leader of the al-Qaeda network in Europe. The first telling phone call came 13 months before the attacks in August of 2000, with another suspected al-Qaeda official known as Al-Hilal talking of plans in the U.S. Al-Hilal, the person who devised this plan, is a madman, but a genius. He will leave them frozen in shock. Es-Sayad, they are dogs, all of them to hell. Al-Hilal, they think they are lions, superpower in the world, but now we are going to do them a job. We can fight any force using candles, perhaps a code word for explosives, and planes. Remember, danger in the airports.
It leads you to no other conclusion than an airplane operation in the United States itself.
It was only in the last month that Italian authorities translated and turned over the tapes to the FBI. Their explanation, the tapes were hard to hear because they were in a little-known dialect and had much background noise.
That's a recurring problem of intelligence services around the world, that collecting information is one thing, but processing it is another thing.
In February of 2001, as the September 11th hijackers were wrapping up their U.S. flight training, Es-Sayad was heard talking with another al-Qaeda operative. Es-Sayad, How is the group doing? Abdel Wahad, all well. They send their greetings. Es-Sayad, I heard that you are entering America. Abdel Wahad, we didn't make it, but it is our greatest desire and objective. Given the close relationship between the Italian authorities and their U.S. counterparts, the tapes appear to be yet another missed signal, Peter, perhaps the clearest one we know of so far.
Many thanks, Brian. Brian Ross on the Italian reports today. Speaking of terrorism, the FBI is going to announce tomorrow a significant reorganization. It's going to dedicate more of its manpower to counterterrorism, and it is going to focus less on solving domestic crimes. The reorganization comes as the FBI is under enormous pressure for missing leads before September the 11th. And with news of that today, what will happen tomorrow, here's ABC's Pierre Thomas.
Nearly 4,000 FBI agents will do nothing but fight terrorism. This will mean diverting resources from areas the FBI has traditionally been involved in, namely drug trafficking, violent crimes such as bank robberies, and white-collar crime.
For the FBI, changing its focus to fighting terrorism will be a very difficult transition to make.
Before September 11th, the FBI was just totally over its head when it came to counterterrorism. The FBI was getting leads it was not following, it was getting information it couldn't put in computers, it didn't know what it was doing.
ABC News has learned FBI Director Mueller and Attorney General Ashcroft are planning to create a national terrorism task force, including agents from the CIA. They will authorize 1,000 police from across the country to receive classified information and will allow agents in the field greater power to take immediate action in emergency situations involving terrorism. Pierre Thomas, ABC News, Washington.
Now, the overseas briefing tonight begins with pretty big news from Libya. Libya has offered a huge amount of money to settle the Lockerbie bombing case. The law firm representing the families of the victims on Pan Am 101, which was bombed over Scotland, says the amount is $2.7 billion. That would mean $10 million for every family if they accept it. There are several conditions attached to the offer. There'll be more about this tomorrow. Pakistan has conducted its third test since Saturday of a missile capable of carrying a nuclear weapon to India. Pakistan, it says it is the last test for the moment. No secret how worried the United States is about this. ABC's John McCarthy is at the Pentagon tonight. John, there's a late reaction as to what the U.S. is trying to do.
Well, Peter, one of the things that we have learned, U.S. officials say that they have now drawn up contingency plans for the emergency evacuation of official Americans. Those are people who draw their paychecks from the U.S. government from both India and Pakistan if things get any worse in that standoff.
Now, I know the people in that building who were concerned that the Pakistanis are so concentrated on the Indians, they're not working as hard on Taliban and al-Qaeda.
The U.S. had been working hand in glove with the Pakistanis on the Pakistani side of the border looking for senior al-Qaeda or any of the al-Qaeda fighters. That has now been stalled as Pakistan's government looks to that conflict or the confrontation with India.
And one last item from there to John. I know that the U.S. is going to put men in harm's way in the Philippines.
Well, there is a recommendation from the top U.S. military official in the Pacific to allow American Special Operations Forces to go out on patrol with Filipino troops as they hunt the Abu Sayyaf terrorists in the jungles on Basilan Island. This would be a step up, a higher risk for American troops there.
Many thanks, John. Three pieces of significant information from the Pentagon tonight. In the rest of the overseas briefing, in the Palestinian West Bank today, a Palestinian got into a Jewish settlement near Nablus and opened fire on students. 3 Israelis died, and the attacker was killed. Amnesty International released its annual report on human rights in the world today. It says the U.S. has sacrificed some human rights in the interest of security since September 11th, particularly by passing emergency laws to detain foreigners without trial. And the organization says several other countries, including South Korea, Jordan, India, and China, have used the war on terrorism to step up repression and undermine human rights protection, which also leads to stifling of political dissent. Here at home again, divers pull more vehicles and more bodies from the river in Oklahoma, where a tugboat tore down a bridge over the weekend. That story when we come back. The latest crash test results for cars are better than ever. We're going to take a closer look at how that has come to pass.
Now where people can expect to walk away from serious frontal crashes with very minor injuries.
And at the end of the broadcast tonight, call him the real Spider-Man. You actually find him in Paris.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by Chevy Trucks.
In the national briefing tonight, the Supreme Court says it will consider whether burning the cross, as the Ku Klux Klan does, is protected as free speech. The court will hear argument on a Virginia law that prohibits cross burning because it is a symbol of racial intimidation. In Texas, the state parole board refused to commute the death sentence for a young man who committed murder as a minor. Napoleon Beasley was 17 when he murdered the father of a federal judge, and he is scheduled to die tonight. The District of Columbia's medical examiner says the precise way that Chandra Levy was murdered may never be determined. In her hometown of Modesto, California, friends and family of the Washington intern attended a memorial service today. In Oklahoma today, 2 vehicles and 4 more bodies were hoisted from the murky waters of the Arkansas River. We now know that at least 13 people lost their lives when 2 barges pushed by a tugboat ran into that bridge along Interstate 40 on Sunday. ABC's Aaron Hayes reports from Weber Falls, Oklahoma, on the river. Aaron?
Peter, investigators here are pressing for answers about this crash. Chief among them, what caused the barge to go so wildly out of control, and what was the barge captain doing? It is the time right before the crash that has everyone so puzzled.
One of the crew members had visited with the captain in the pilot house. His time estimate was 5 to 10 minutes before the collision, and he said everything was normal at that time.
The barge on course, captain seemed fine. The crew member went below deck. Minutes later, he felt the crash. The barge had never slowed its speed. The captain had not sounded the alarm.
You sound a general alarm on the vessel so that the crew members can brace themselves for the impact, and then you blow the whistle or horn to alert people in the area. Those items occurred according to the other crew members, but they did not occur until after the impact.
Backing up the theory that the captain was somehow incapacitated. Federal investigators hope to interview the captain later today. Recovery crews, meanwhile, pressed on at the river, in between the storms that just keep cycling through here, making a mess of things.
There's a feeling of helplessness that we're not doing all we can be doing.
But they are slowly making progress. More cars recovered, more bodies. Divers all week have marked vehicles they find with buoys so cranes can lift them out. They believe there are more vehicles here, though, they have not found. And they have a new worry: today's rains filling local lakes. Those dams may have to release water into the river, slowing the recovery work.
We're at the mercy of Mother Nature, and we just have to watch very closely where the rainfall and how much, and then make some probably tough decisions.
There are tough decisions to make here nearly every hour. It's dangerous work. Still, crews have asked to work into the night, bringing in lights to stay on the river as long as they can. Peter?
Thanks, Aaron. Aaron Hayes. There's one other item today about water. The journal Science reports that the planet Mars contains vast deposits of ice under its surface. And if there is all that water there, it might be easier for humans to explore the planet, or at least so goes the argument. When we come back this evening, why cars are performing so much better in crash tests. We'll take a closer look. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety said today that every car in its recent head-on crash tests earned the top rating of good. The 9 mid-size cars were both U.S. and foreign models. The results were quite different from 1995, when the Institute tested 14 cars and only 3 rated good. So we're going to take a closer look tonight at what is behind the improvement. Here's ABC's Lisa Stark.
7 years ago, most cars did poorly on the test. This was the Saab 900. This year's model of the same Saab received the highest rating. The Insurance Institute says all automakers are designing safer cars, better crumple zones to absorb the force of the crash, stiffer occupant protection areas to ensure the vehicle doesn't cave in on the driver.
They're all doing well because easy to do well if you make it a priority.
There's little doubt crash tests drive automakers to make safety improvements.
They want to look good, and they certainly don't want to look bad. No one wants to be the poor performer that gets highlighted on the national news in the evening.
For consumers, safety sells.
I would rank it probably right after price and affordability.
Some manufacturers use good test results in their ads.
The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety has given every Subaru they tested their highest possible rating.
When competition comes into play, the automakers are going to want to be first to market with the new device, the new technology, the new safety feature.
Safety advocates are concerned that as automakers design to pass crash tests, they may pay less attention to other areas of vehicle safety.
Consumers Union, which does its own testing, says manufacturers need to give as much focus to other types of accidents as they have to frontal crashes.
We think that there is a lot of work to be done to make vehicles safer. For example, rear-end collisions, seat back safety, whiplash safety, side impact safety.
The Insurance Institute is preparing tough new side impact crash tests. Automakers are already running the tests themselves to make sure they can pass. Lisa Stark, ABC News, Washington.
The Insurance Institute's evaluation of the cars is available at abcnews.com. Just one other item of good news today for people in the San Diego area. The USS Stennis returned to its home port today after 6 months spent supporting troops in Afghanistan. Thousands of family members cheered. The 5,500 sailors and Marines who returned, 60 of them became new fathers while they were away. When we come back this evening, the final item in the broadcast, exploring the city in a very different way. Real-life Spider-Man, you find them in Paris. Just a brief review of the main story. President Bush is on his way home from his tour of Europe. While the president was in Rome, the NATO alliance agreed to admit its former enemy, Russia, as a limited partner. How times change. And in Vatican City, the president met with the Pope. He told John Paul he was worried, the president was, that sexual abuse in the U.S. Catholic Church in the U.S. was damaging the church's reputation. Finally from us this evening, finding the real man behind the new Hollywood hero. Sort of. Spider-Man has already become the most popular movie of the year, but it is only fiction. We're going to go to Paris tonight for the true story. Here's ABC's Richard Gisbert.
Part of the magic of Spider-Man and his lasting appeal is his ability to navigate the city without touching the ground. The special effects help. Meet the real-life version, David Bell, leaping between buildings 23 feet apart and 65 feet up. Only no special effects, no safety harnesses. Bell did this for a TV ad. But he and his friends in Paris call what they do urban exploration. In this era, we've seen everything, says Bell. We've explored mountains, oceans, everything. I explore a path no one has taken before. He's talking about the inner city, and the movement he began 8 years ago now includes other city kids with energy to burn and nowhere to burn it. So they've turned their city into a concrete gym. The good news is it gets kids off the street. The not so good news is they're on the rooftops, jumping off stairwells, and down alleys. We see the environment as a tool to develop the human body, he says. Each wall, each rock is an instrument. Each obstacle overcome is a personal success. So what looks like a gang of marauding teenagers is really a careful urban choreography. It demands the creativity of the dancer, the discipline of the martial artist, and the precision of the gymnast.
I can hear the sound of violin.
That and the risks involved have caught the eye of advertisers. Bell was the centerpiece of an ad campaign for Britain's BBC television, and Nike, which always has an ear to the street, recently shot a commercial with Bell's gang for American TV. But David Bell says it's not about getting endorsements. It's the need to challenge yourself, he says. It's about finding a rhythm and losing yourself in it, preferably without losing your life. Richard Gisbert, ABC News, Paris.
That's our report on World News Tonight. Tomorrow on the broadcast, the drug companies paying their competitors not to bring cheaper generic versions of their drugs to the marketplace. Don't forget Nightline. I'm Peter Jennings. Have a good evening.